point, Francis decided that the film was only going to be shown in one theater. It was going to be a specially built, constructed theater that would be erected in the geographic center of the United States, somewhere in Kansas. And it would just show this film only, and the film would run for 10 years, and it would be a fantastic cinematic experience, sort of like going to Mount Rushmore. You'd go to see this film.
And the exhibitors, the fuckers, are going to see it. And then they're going to play the picture on our terms, with our sound, the way we want them to show it.
I began to think, well, let's do this as a big war film and do it as a huge production with Sensurround, which was a new process that Universal had invented, which would rock the seats, and shoot it in IMAX, make it as big as possible.
The theater in Kansas was not constructed, but the film was released in quadraphonic sound. That was one of those ideas that actually made it to the screen.
The Jazz Singer was the first sound film to be released in the US, in fact, worldwide. And at that time, most screens were pretty small, so the image that you saw was a long way away and pretty minute. As a result, the sound was in mono, single loudspeaker behind the screen. When we got to the early 50s, the first sign of competition from television occurred. People started having black and white TVs in their living rooms. And the result was that the film industry felt that in some way they had to compete in terms of the quality of the presentation. In fact, the most landmark issue that resulted from it was the issue of The Robe in 1953, which was 20th Century Fox's first CinemaScope picture, which was twice as wide as anything anybody had seen in the cinema before. And they felt that you couldn't have a picture that wide without sound to match it. As a result, they developed what was called a 4-track magnetic process: left, center, right, across the screen, and a surround channel, a single surround channel behind you. By 1970, these big picture formats were dying out. You might perhaps catch a 70mm release in a big city or what was called a roadshow release, but that was very rare. But there's competition again coming from the home. Color TV is the norm, and people are getting more sophisticated staying at home. So the film industry had to fight back in some measure. And that was one of the things that led to, in the mid-70s, to the release of Dolby Stereo. This meant we had 4-channel sound in the theaters: left, center, right, and surround, all off the conventional photographic optical process. But the print was compatible for playback in a mono theater. And indeed, the print cost was no higher than that of a conventional mono-optical soundtrack. There were still occasional 70mm releases, but the way that was done was for 5 channels behind the screen. There was, let us say, one solo voice. So what would happen was that single voice would get spread on all 5 channels, and the result was a big, foggy mess. You wouldn't know where the sound was going to come from. And I really wanted to do something better for 70mm. And the next step in that history came in 1977 with the release of a little film called Star Wars. So my thinking was that using 2 tracks instead of half left and half right for the 5 channels behind the screen, we'd take the 70mm print and just use left, center, and right, and take those 2 intermediate tracks and just use them to augment the bass response. And that came to be known as Baby Boom. That's why Star Wars is pretty clear behind the screen, good stereo definition in the original 1977 release, but also had much better bass response than the cinema than was common at the time.
And I'll take my time. I'll turn down any exhibitor who doesn't have a theater that is in condition to have an audience.
So it was apparent that the next logical step would be to try and find a process that would enable you to have stereo surround tracks, both left and right. But significant that Apocalypse Now was one of the very first, in fact, the first announced film to have a stereo surround format, which we tentatively call split surround or stereo surrounds.
Helicopter surrounds. So it goes.
Really, it's the great-grandfather or the grandfather of what today is on almost every film release and every DVD release, which is known as 5.1 sound, which is 5.1 channels or 3 channels behind the screen, left surround, right surround, and a subwoofer channel, which is the 0.1. Here we have 6 magnetic stripes on the film. Look like 3, but there's 2 tracks here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those tracks on a conventional 70mm would be left, center, right, and a mono surround track. Sometimes the 2 extra half channels of half left and half right. So on Apocalypse, what we have was left, then a track that has the low-frequency information and also the high-frequency information for left rear. And then center, half right is the same boom and surround combination, and then a mono surround track for theaters that are not equipped for this new stereo surround format. What I'd say is the average person in the home today has got his surrounds turned up far too high and his subwoofers turned up far too high because he wants to show off to his neighbor that he's got a home theater. And in actual fact, it's not replicating the intent of the movie maker the way that the average film is played back at home. God damn it.